I'm Doug Swanney. I'm the Connection Secretary of the Methodist Church in Britain and also one of the co-chairs of the European Methodist Council. And I'm on this Zoom call that we're recording some time ago with two good friends and colleagues, and they're going to introduce themselves. Heather.
My name's Heather Morris. I'm the Secretary of Conference for the Irish Methodist Church.
Thank you, Heather. Christian.
Yes, hello. I'm Christian Alsted. I'm the Bishop in the Nordic and Baltic countries, and that is the United Methodist Church.
Wonderful. We're just going to have a bit of a conversation about some of the themes that we hope you'll be able to carry forward in the small groups after this. And obviously all of us have been reflecting on what it is to be a leader, what it is to be part of a Methodist connected church over these last few months. And it's been great to see the videos that have told us a bit of that story. But I think what's interesting for me particularly is trying to reflect over these last few months, what have we been called to be as leaders? What kind of leadership has been asked of you over these last few months? And Christian, what's the thing that's really been asked of you as a leader by your conferences?
I think this whole period since the beginning of March, it's been one adaptation after the other. Just new things happening, new information that immediately affected us, closing down of churches. When are we going to reopen? What are the guidelines going to be? What is this going to mean? And so on. In the beginning, it was in the very beginning, it was like crisis management. We didn't really know what was going on and how long would this be. But I would say that quite soon it led into a need to help the church to adapt to this new situation and to encourage people to adapt and to look for new ways to engage in ministry. Many leaders and pastors did that really on their own initiative. They didn't need that encouragement. They were already there. At times they were a couple of steps in front of us, but there were also pastors who needed help simply to cope with that situation. So I think it was a bit of both. Adaptation, encouragement, care.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And Heather, I know that adaptive leadership is something that's very close to your own heart. We've done some work on that together. Have you seen different kinds of adaptations needing to be made? Have you learned things about yourself as a leader that you weren't aware of before?
Interesting. I think that certainly the leadership that was the obvious demand was the nitty-gritty to which Christian has referred. I think an interesting learning point for me in that was, and it was someone else said it in a webinar, was that as he looked at the church, he saw evidence of a capacity to change, to be flexible, to be responsive. And that for me was like a wake up, because I thought, wow, in a couple of months, we really have changed. And that I think was encouraging for us to hear. It wasn't a change we'd sought, but there had been change, and the imagination and experimentation that we long to see was evidenced. I think that one of the things for myself reflecting on that was that part of me just got really comfortable in the detail nitty-gritty, not at all adaptive at all. While that was challenging, in a way that was the easy stuff, because you could be clear, you could say this is the way it is. But actually that leadership that is the looking ahead, the balcony, the whatever language you want to put on that, in a context that is rapidly changing with lots of things beyond our control, was the challenge. And for me in this role, a little bit of pushback came where I was saying, well, guys, can we think together about what might be lying down the road and think into the future? And folks come back and saying, but we've so much to do with this immediate stuff. So I think part of the role for me in this particular role was to try with others, and team's been really important in this, to do a bit of thinking ahead, so that we've got resources and thoughts in place as things unfurl. So that was one of the challenges, and one of my personal reflections was just take the time to step back and think and pray into what might be a wee bit further down the road.
And that's so interesting, because I guess I was reflecting on this, that we've talked for a long time about the need for us to do more online than we do as a church. And for years, most of us in a leadership role have said, no, we can't do that. We're all about relations. People won't want to do it. You know, we can do a little bit online, but we can't do it all. And then, of course, we had the situation that we had no choice. And all of a sudden, we did everything online. And it really made us, you know, it made me reflect and say, well, actually, at times, does some of the adaptation and the change not happen because we as leaders actually either don't have the confidence in the people we're leading, or actually something quite interesting happened, that because there was no other option, people rose to that challenge. And so the church has changed at a speed that I think has been, it's been phenomenal in some ways. So no, that's really interesting. Christian, you said something in there about operating in crisis mode, which I think we're all aware has been part of what we've had to do in responding to the detail. But how do we pace ourselves in that? Because working in crisis mode is often, you know, it's high energy, it's keeping going. What have you learned, or what would you say about how do you pace yourself to say, actually, this isn't sustainable for the long term, but how you manage that in the short term in the crisis we've been in?
I think we moved quite quickly, really out of a crisis mode. Perhaps after the first couple of weeks, when we realized this is going to be some time. It's not going to be over in a month or so. This will be something we will have to live with for some time. And the longer we went forth, the more we realized it's going to be even longer. So what we did was to begin really to build some strong networks. The pastor, the district superintendents in each of the annual conferences would gather the pastors online on a regular basis. I would gather the district superintendents on a regular basis to catch up on the development, also to have some spiritual fellowship, but also to reflect together on what are we learning, what is emerging, what is coming. How can we deal with this? Where are the difficult areas that we need to deal with? What are the questions that needs to be asked? How can we best support the pastors and so on? So I would say we moved fairly quickly out of that crisis mode to a new way of operating, and in a way, a very healthy way of operating. I don't think the DSs have had such a strong contact with the pastors on their district ever before. And I would probably say the same with my contact with the district superintendents. It was close, it was direct, it was continuous, and that was helpful and strengthening in a number of areas.
And is that the same for you, Heather? Is that sense of moving out of crisis into a new way of working that's been stronger in terms of linking with people? Is that, have you experienced that?
I think that's one of the potential. Yes, I have. So a couple of RDSs who have gathered groups, as Christian has described, and that's been very, very helpful. Circuits who've worked together, I think, in ways that they hadn't before, even though that's part of what we are. I think the challenge going forward is to keep working together. So what I'm beginning to notice in some places as church buildings begin to reopen is that those circuit close links folks are now saying, that's grand, we'll do it on our own now, thank you. And so one of the things that we're pushing into and trying to encourage is actually, please continue to work together to be these teams, to encourage each other, to share resource. So if online is going to be part of what we are in a blended way going forward, everybody doesn't have to do their own online service on the circuit. You know, share that out a bit, so that we're sharing the load and sharing resources. So I think keeping going with those lessons is one of the things that, one of the challenges we face.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what's interesting for those of us in this bit of our islands in Britain is that we discovered what it is to minister in 3 different jurisdictions. So because we had Scotland, Wales, and England all making their own decisions, now you're both smiling. Because, you know, that's your normal way of working. You traverse boundaries and you have to take account of what's going on. Has this whole situation, has that highlighted that, or has it made it easier to find commonality across the areas you work in? What's that been like, Christian, in Nordic and Baltic area?
Yeah. I mean, guidelines in the 7 countries that I'm working in, guidelines have been different, and so I couldn't assume that what was the guidelines in one place would be the same in others. The reopening of churches has been very different, and the countries have been affected on different levels, and also the governments have responded in very different ways to the pandemic. So it's been really interesting to juggle that. But then there's been so many common denominators in the ways that people have responded to this, in the challenges the pastors have had, and probably particularly in the reopening of the churches, where we have faced many of the same challenges, but again, different restrictions. You know, in some places they opened up so that we could quite immediately begin to worship with some distance and so on. But in other places they opened up, but we couldn't really start to worship because the number was so low that it wouldn't really make sense. And there were churches that had too high an attendance to make it work. So also the DSs have had to be very flexible and to try to help pastors to adapt to those different situations.
And with that adapting going on, I mean, certainly part of the conversation that we've been part of for a while is, this is a Kairos moment, and now we have to reimagine church, and nothing's ever going to be the same. But actually, church has been reimagined without us doing any strategic leadership work. It looks different. And I'm just wondering how we now respond to that, because there's a danger, isn't there, that as leaders, we're still in the mindset of what church was 6 months ago, and it's now very different. So, you know, in terms of that adaptability, Heather, just thinking, you know, you're looking at the Methodist Church in Ireland, and people are saying, it's now a time of change. Is that change something that we, you know, are we being carried along by it? What's our role as leaders in something that's so different from where we were 6 months ago, I guess?
I think for me, one of the roles of leadership is to keep on asking the big picture questions. So the pull is to get back to as near as normal as we possibly can. And while it's different, somebody was pushing back to me today. It was a very helpful conversation, because in a seminar like this, I had said the worst possible thing that could happen is that we go back to the way things were. Exactly. And he was saying, but I want it to be the way things were. It was a good conversation. But actually, I don't want us to go back to the way things were with social distancing. Right, it's about picking up the lessons that we've learned. So where that might be a lesson about the importance of relationship, because most of us are hungry to be in the same room. You know, how do we translate that? How do we bring that in with our Methodist heritage, where small groups are key? What's God prompting about small? What are the relationships? So two people last week who were saying, at this stage, I know my physical next door neighbors better than I ever did. Well, what's God prompting there? So it's about picking up those lessons and pushing in. So I think a leadership task is to maybe be provocative a wee bit, to ask the big questions, so that we don't just go back to the way things were, but actually do carry those lessons, so that the only change isn't the change that we're made to do, but we're actually thinking and discerning through this.
And whether that makes us as churches, as communities, much more open to that ongoing challenge, change, that's the constant. We've talked about that for a long time, that change is the only constant, but actually we've not been very good at seeing that change, you know, as something positive. But actually, if there are things out of this that we can harness, I think that's really, really critical. I guess the kind of final thing that I think would be really useful for us to reflect on together is that we can think about this as leaders in our own context. So we've spoken a bit about that, but hopefully the council is going to think about, what does this mean for us as leaders in a cross-European context? And particularly where our way of working over the last few years is very focused on being together and building those relationships. We're now not together physically, probably for the first time in the council's history. What does that mean for us as leaders and our responsibility to one another in terms of what changes for our way of working as European leaders? I'm just interested if you've had any thoughts on that, Christian. Is that something that you've been wrestling with?
Yeah. But could I come back and comment on the other question? Is that okay?
Please. Oh yeah, on you go. We'll edit it later.
Because it was really interesting what Heather was saying about, you know, going back to what was before, going back to normal. I had a meeting with the DSs last week, and one of the questions I asked was, what is your worst fear for the future? And almost all of them replied that we go back to how things were before.
Wow.
And I thought that was really interesting, because we've talked so much about rethinking church, about thinking out of the box, about reimagining what church could be, not thinking about building, thinking about community, thinking about relationships, reaching out to people, using social media, using digital communication, and so on. And suddenly, we were all forced to do it. And in the midst of this, I believe that has been a gift to us. That we were thrown out in this, and we all had to imagine this. There was no way that we could stay with normal. Our task, I think, will be for the future to continue to encourage those who continue to think out of the box, to try to protect people from going back, and to remind them that this is not what we should do. This is not what we have learned. To lift that up all the time, because what we have experienced now, and that is what people in our countries have experienced. We have all shared in the same experience. We've all had, in our daily lives, in our relationships, in our lack of relationships, in our social isolation, we've all had the same experience. There's something there to speak into and to work with that is quite unique. What an opportunity.
No, I think that's really amazing, actually, because we're now in a Zoom room with leaders from all across Europe, and rather than us focusing on the things that make us different, we've all just had a shared experience.
Yes.
Really shared experience. And that surely gives us a common place to think about the next 5 years and be the people that hold all those we work with to say, this is new, this is a new way of being, and let's embrace that.
I love that. And I think as well as that, when we're thinking about how we might continue to work together across Europe, we have learned in this sort of context that we can work on Zoom or on Teams. And actually, you know, while it's not the same, there's the potential to support each other in an ongoing way, which we didn't have before or weren't aware of to the same extent before. And there could be potential in gatherings like this or conversations like this to actually support each other as we continue to push into this together, which might be something useful coming out of this. Yeah.
Heather, Christian, fabulous, just great conversations, and I really hope when the council go off into the small groups, which they're about to do, they can wrestle with some of these questions and maybe just reflect on some of what we've said. So thank you both.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Over to you now, Doug or Harold. Thank you.